This next session will be the first in a series of product launches. So these are things that we've been cooking to make Palantir an even better developer platform. So this first session and this first launch will be something that speaks to you if you've ever tried to use another developer's computer. It's impossible, from custom keyboard shortcuts to custom config in their IDEs to a 1,000-line bash RC that's inscrutable. It's all opinionated and tuned to how they want to work. And maybe that's not the setup that you have. Maybe you actually don't want to think about that at all, and you want to have that taken care of for you. Either way, we have this latest launch will show you how you can either bring the tools that you are comfortable with, have configured, use the way that you want, and work with Foundry and all of our APIs in that tool, both north and south of ontology, or have that taken care of for you. So with that, I will pass it to Ramsey to show you some of that.
All right, thank you, Ankit. Cool. Hey, everyone. My name is Ramsey. I've been at Palantir for 6 years. I'm a software engineer on the product side, and I work specifically on the core infrastructure group, which is the group that's responsible for the compute infrastructure in Foundry, but recently spending a lot more time building developer tools. I don't think it's a secret by now. You're at the DevCon. You've heard about like the developer platform that we're building from everyone this morning. You've also seen the kick-ass demos from you guys, our customers. And so we're really investing very heavily in developer tools and bringing those to Foundry, and really like improving the state of what Foundry can do today. To do this, well, for my presentation, I'm going to give you a demo of the stuff that we've built over the past year. Some of them you might have seen, some of them they're coming, some of you are beta testers of those and are giving us feedback for those features. And I'm going to go through it by working on and showing you an app that I built on my phone over the past week, just for purposes of this demo. And then we're going to go ahead and modify it. And I'll use that as an opportunity to highlight the different bits of the platform that we've introduced over the past year. So this is my personal phone. It's nothing special, but I have this, you can't see it. Cool. So if you're like me and you try to follow tech news in general, you might have this problem. If you don't and you know of an app that already exists, please let me know. But one thing that I find is I follow a bunch of tech news sources, maybe 20 of them. And every time an event happens, let's say Apple releases an M4 Mac or something like that, what I end up having is I have the 20 sources say the same article, and I have to scroll through pages of the same information again and again, which I don't have a lot of time to do, or I don't care much about a specific event that happened, and I don't want to read 20 articles about it. So what I wanted to do is see how far the platform has come by building this app just in over the past few days, which is essentially an RSS feed reader. It aggregates RSS feeds and then puts them in this kind of format. It's a React application that's mobile friendly, and it's hosted on a personal kind of subdomain. And one thing that it does is, so you're seeing this in real time. Those are actual articles coming in real time. And let's see if we find an article. Oh, so that's a Christmas gifts to get your friends. And if it finds duplicates across different sources, it aggregates them. M4 gifts. Let's see if there's something more interesting. So I don't know, threads, bringing ads. So you can see that 9to5Mag and Engadget wrote about this event happening, which is Meta introducing ads for threads. And that's cool. I don't have to see multiple articles across pages about this. And I get those aggregated and it saves my time. So I also don't judge my CSS skills. Again, as I said, I'm an infrastructure engineer, but I'm trying. And luckily, the platform makes it very easy for me to get started. I really like the minimalistic aspect of this application, but I think it lacks a little bit of color. So we're going to go ahead and add that. RSS feeds have images sometimes in their description. They come as HTML image tags. We're going to see if we can extract some of those from the information we have and then pipe that into the application. Does that sound good? Yes? No? Sounds good. All right. I'm going to move to my laptop now. Cool. Before we get started, maybe very quickly, this is data lineage. You can see the architecture of my application in here. It's nothing very special. On one side, you can see there are RSS ingests. There's an ETL step, and then there's my application at the end, which is this piece right here. So for the RSS feed imports, I initially started writing my own what we call compute module, and it had like logic to parse the RSS feeds, read the article, check the objects that haven't been ingested yet, and like ingest the rest and deal with missing columns. But then I discovered by chance that Foundry has an RSS connector out of the box. And so all I had to do is just put the URL there and then open up the networking ports just for security purposes. And then I did that for the list of my articles. And it's pretty neat because I don't have to do the boring task of dealing with like missing columns and missing fields or broken XMLs. So that's one area in which I think I can merge the kind of low code development for some of the boring tasks that I'm not very interested in, and then spend most of my energy on writing the application, which is what I cared about. And I wanted to learn a bit more React development in the process. So that's where I wanted to spend my time rather than setting up a Python RSS reader. So that's great. So I just had to paste the URL in here. And what I get out of this is I get those data sets which contain RSS feeds. They get updated as soon as there's an article. It runs on some cadence that gets added as a row in one of those data sets. What I'm going to do next is I also have a data pipeline, just your typical like Spark ETL pipeline. And what it does is it cleans up HTML tags. It takes dates from strings, converts them into actual dates that I can then sort and query. So we're gonna add the image extraction here and see if we can do this. So what you're seeing right here is Foundry. So this is VS Code in Foundry. I can open those Python repositories for my Spark pipelines in VS Code. This is a new thing that we've introduced over the past year. You've heard about Code Workspaces this morning. This runs on top of Code Workspaces. If you're not familiar with Code Workspaces, it's a platform tool that we have that lets us bring open source IDEs, which really speaks to the investments that we're making. We want to bring the popular tools that you guys are using. So whether it's Jupyter Notebooks, RStudio, VS Code now, we're bringing more and more of those to the platform so that you can use those rather than having you use our specific IDE that we built in-house.
And this means you don't have to actually do any of that setup. This is one click, I can jump directly into VS Code.
Exactly. And the cool thing is we also immediately set up your environment. This is a private sandbox you get. I find it particularly powerful when I'm doing ML development. I can immediately ask for any type of GPU that I want, the specific make here, and test my code immediately while I'm iterating on it. So I don't need to fry up my machine or get a specific server or permission for spinning up an AWS instance just to test my code, and then the iteration loop and uploading it and deploying and all that.
Or figuring out how to install the CUDA drivers.
Exactly. So that all happens under the hood. But let's say I don't want to use the in-platform VS Code, and instead I want to do this on my own machine. Let's say I'm flying to DEF CON, and I know I'm going to have spotty internet connection, and I'd like to have a version of my code locally. So all I need to do is come here and press on work locally. I get this git clone URL. Oops. And what I do here is I git clone and I paste this. I'm not going to paste it because it has a token, and I was told that I should not paste tokens. We're going to assume that I have it here, and I'm just going to code dot, which opens it in my local VS Code. So now you're seeing the same thing that's in Foundry, but this is my local machine's VS Code. One important aspect of this is that you'll see we have a Palantir logo in here, which means that we have a Palantir extension for VS Code, which is something that we've been working on over the past year. I think it's pretty cool because that really speaks to the idea that we're bringing Foundry to the developers. We're not asking you to go to Foundry and use the tools that are there. We're really bringing Foundry to the developer experience. And if you look at the market, VS Code is just by far the most popular IDE that's out there. The extension lets you do things like check your repositories. It sets up your Python environment under the hood. It lets you search Foundry datasets as you're importing them by name, by resource ID, and then also lets you build against Foundry. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So cool. I have all of this locally. I'm going to add the column. So we have the description, which is a column that we have. I'm going to see if I can parse that. But it's 2024, and I'm a lazy developer, so I'm just going to use Copilot. Which takes a HTML string and returns the URL of the first image tag. Cool. That looks about right. If you're wondering why it's auto-completing correctly for the next bit, it's because I've rehearsed it multiple times. So I think it memorized what I'm trying to do. I hope they don't go ahead and analyze the logs for me doing this 20 times today. But what I basically have is two methods. One of them takes a string that might have HTML tags, extracts the first image tag if it's available, otherwise returns none. And then the other one just takes the description column and returns and adds a column, which is the image URL. I'm going to go ahead then and just add this here. So that's not what I want. That's what I want. Cool. So I added this. One of the cool features of Foundry, if you've used it in platform, but we've also brought this to VS Code locally, which is this preview button in here. What it does is it lets me take any method that I have that interacts with datasets in Foundry, and then we'll take the actual dataset from production and pipe it in as an input, sort of magically. I think this is one of the coolest features of Foundry. And then I don't have to write the text or synthesize it or spend a lot of time doing that. It just runs against production data. Just as inputs, it's not going to write production data as outputs. So let's see if that worked. Oops. Do we have? Cool. Oh, we have an image URL column. So good job, Copilot. And let's say I'm happy with this. I want to build it. We actually have a hammer button right here. And what it does, tells me that I have to pull my changes and then commit them. Oop. This is code signing features we have. Cool, and it's actually triggering a build against Foundry. So I'm getting like this build the code that I wrote locally running against the Spark cluster that I have in Foundry, and hopefully we'll see that reflected as well. We'll start seeing the results of that build. If it fails, if it succeeds, we'll see all of that in my local VS Code, so I don't have to leave that if I'm happy with this as my development environment. One thing that I didn't speak about is the preview feature. We completely rewrote that in Rust. So a lot of the infrastructure that we're building locally we're trying to make that as performant as possible. And so we completely rewrote. It has a lot of, I think, neat features in terms of parsing your Python code, like detecting the functions and doing that all under the hood, every keystroke you write, so that we can also provide helpful linting features, autocomplete features. And so we're trying to really invest in this, in those kinds of tools. And if you've seen that, what I've shown you in platform, those are the same tools that we leverage in both cases. So we also have the Palantir extension in here. So the investments that we're making in platform also serve us outside of the platform and vice versa. Cool. So we built this. It's building against Foundry. You can see the result. It's passing my checks. It's doing my CI/CD, and it's going to build. After this, while it's happening, we can talk about the next step of our pipeline. I want to take this. I have this union of all of the datasets and all of the feeds that I have. And then what I'm doing is using Pipeline Builder to convert those rows into objects. But before we do this, I have this simple transformation in the middle, which generates embeddings. Now, if you're not very familiar with the kind of embeddings and AI and ML, embeddings are sort of multi-dimensional vectors that semantically represent the content. And I'm doing this for my similarity search in the articles. Basically, the basic idea of it is that if the vectors are close together, then those articles are about the same thing. If they're very far from each other and they're pointing in different directions, then they're different articles and about different topics. Again, I'm not an ML expert, and I didn't want to spend time, setting up models and everything. So Pipeline Builder has this board. I just had to add it in here, pipe in my articles, and then get access to all of the popular models from OpenAI or others to generate embeddings. And that's all I had to do. And then at the end of this process, I take all of the data that I've processed using code. They become rows. Those rows, I can process them again using Pipeline Builder, which is our low-code approach to pipelining, and then generate objects at the end. So at this point in time, we've parsed the RSS feeds. We extracted the image URL, and then we generated objects with that enriched property. You'll see the preview load in a second. The only last bit that's left is taking those objects and then reflecting them into the application that I have on my phone. And before we do this, I want to take a second to talk to you about all of the improvements that we've done and the features that we've introduced in terms of the OSDK and the developer platform. So I'm going to move to the slides for a second. Cool. So you've heard about this already, but bear with me. I think you're going to hear about this over the next day and a half as well. So hopefully the point will be made that we're really investing in the OSDK as the way that you interact with Foundry. The way I think about this, and you're going to hear about it in more detail at different sessions over the next day, but the way I think about it is it's really the API to your organization. So I have my organization in this case is the data set of of articles, tech articles, and that is my organization. And the OSDK is the API with which I can interact with this rich model that I've had and have invested in. So I've invested in cleaning up the data sets, I've invested in enriching it with embeddings, and the OSDK is the API with which I can interact with that. And Developer Console, which is a new app that we've introduced over the past year, is really the home of those OSDK applications. So it lets me manage those OSDK applications, create the clients, define the scopes, and also very cool features that I'm going to show you in a second, like see metrics about who's using my application, like the performance of that, and many other features. One thing that we need out of a developer platform is a deployment pipeline. So I'm writing code, how do I deploy it? Well, the good thing is we've done this for the past 10 years. If you've used Foundry for writing Spark pipelines, we have a whole CI/CD pipeline where you can customize it, and it runs pretty well. Taking your code, which is what I just showed you with the build button in VS Code, taking it and turning it into deployed code against a Spark cluster. Well, we can use the same very hardened and tested technology to bring that for OSDK React apps. What I did in this case is I started from Foundry, and I get the whole deployment pipeline that comes with it. Another aspect is, where am I going to deploy my application? Well, we've introduced a website hosting feature inside of Foundry. This depends on your enrollment and who manages the domain, so we can talk about that if you're interested in the feature. But I can host the application entirely in Foundry on a custom subdomain, and then I can open it on my phone. I can send the link to someone else, and I get all of those features without having to worry about setting up certificates and deploying the deployment infrastructure that gets to that domain and DNS records, et cetera, et cetera. I get all of this for free, and I didn't know how the networking works in this case. And another cool thing is also bringing in extra features like metrics. I'm going to show you how that looks like for my app, so not spending too much time on this. And I think before we move to the demo, I think one of the most important bits here is, again, we're bringing Foundry to developers and to the tools that you're using today. So I'm talking to you about website hosting and the deployment pipeline that we have in Foundry, but you don't have to use this. If you're perfectly happy doing this on your own companies, let's say you're using GitHub and Circle CI, you can do this. We're very happy to support you. Let's say you have a hosting infrastructure already, then good for you. You don't have to use Foundry for that. What we really care about is empowering you and making sure that you get to build as powerfully as possible. And we're even helping you do this. We're introducing a command line tool that lets you integrate that into GitHub Actions and then publish to Foundry. So really, like, all of that is in docs, and I'm going to be around. We can talk about this. Cool. We'll move again to my demo for a second. This is Dev Console. It's a Dev Console for my Read application. And I think people have shown you this already, but we have very helpful docs for doing everything that I might want to do with my application, and the specific objects that I care about. And the thing that I was telling you about is we also have this code repository feature, which, as an infrastructure engineer, I didn't really know how to get started with my React app. So I just used this feature, which spins up all the infrastructure that I need to build React applications in Foundry using that OSDK. And I can click this button, which opens it in VS Code. And I get this. I think Tom showed you this earlier on his local machine, but this is the equivalent in Foundry, which is I get this side-by-side view of my code with the live application there using my live ontology, and I can make changes and see how that looks like. The way that I usually like showing this to people is just doing this silly, maybe CSS change, where I can come here and do a simple change, and that changes live. And I think that's, if you're familiar with front-end development, that's not groundbreaking. It's just hot module reloading, and it's a very popular feature. But for someone who's not very familiar with React and TypeScript, I get to get this very quick feedback loop, and I can get started without worrying too much about waiting a long time before I see the results and I see that I have an error. So let's revert that because we prefer this color. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and go to my article card. All I need to do is, so we introduced this new property over my ontology. This article card is, they can put the React component that I have for this card. And we've introduced this new image URL, which is a string or undefined. We're gonna pipe it into this card, and we're gonna go ahead and just uncomment this piece. Cool. And there we go. The images are showing up. And yeah, well, to be clear, this is not a bug. Most RSS feeds don't produce images, it turns out, which is unfortunate. I need to scrape the articles, but at least many of them do. 9to5Mac does that, and it's great. Cool. So I've done this. How do I push this to production? Well, we have, I can do this in Foundry. So first, what I need to do is just add my changes, and then push that to the repository that I have in Foundry. And then all I need to do is just go here and cut a new release. This is the version that's going to happen. And while I do this, I can go back to my phone. If you can get that on the screen, that would be great. Cool. It's still releasing. It's going to take a second or two. Three seconds. So what this is doing is it's packaging this up, spinning a job, running all the scripts that I have in CI, and then pushing all of that back to Foundry to where I'm hosting that domain, which is at read. I think devcon yellow marmot, which is the domain people chose for this devcon, and then I can see the new version live once it publishes. Normally this is much faster, but there we go. So it's published, and then what I'm hoping to see is that in my live version here, which is not connected to the preview that I was showing you earlier. This is like the live in production version. I can see articles. So that's great. And it's a very quick feedback loop. So we have actually plenty of time left, but we were able to go from our RSS feed, parse the articles, go through Pipeline Builder, go through the application, test the changes in test, and then push them to production. And then we have that in production live. Again, ignore my CSS skills. That can probably be fixed. If I move back to my laptop for a second, I'm going to show you some cool features, given that we have a few extra minutes. So if I go to my dev console again, you can see the deployment of my application in website hosting. I'll zoom in a bit. And you can see that this got deployed. This is the version that got deployed 59 seconds ago. If I want to roll back to any version, let's say I discover that there's an issue and I want to roll back, all I have to do is just deploy to production, and then that immediately gets switched under the hood. I don't need to wait for the deployment pipeline to happen. That automatically has switched it back to the previous version, and I can roll back that easily. So I don't have to worry about managing the versioning. I push the bug. How do I roll this back? If you have great infrastructure that does this, that's fantastic. If you don't and you'd rather rely on Foundry doing that for you, we have all of this, and you don't have to worry about shipping bugs in production. Another cool feature is this metrics tab, which is still in beta, but lets me see very useful metrics about my application. I can see P95s and P75s for my endpoints. And I can click the specific endpoints that I care about and see why some of them are slow. So in this case, for example, I know that I'm reading all of those articles, and then for each one of them, I'm calling a serverless function that does the cosine similarity and then aggregating all of that in the front end. So it's not the fastest thing. It shows you the kind of like the nice looking spinner, but ideally I don't want you to see the spinner. And so I know that I probably will move that to happen in the back end if I have a few extra days to spare on this. And then I can see cool analytics features here. That brings me to the end of my demo. Maybe the thing that I want to say is this really isn't about building an RSS feed reader app. If you remember two things out of this presentation, it's those two. One, we're really investing in developers and the developer platform. So we're going to bring Foundry to where you work, the IDEs that you care about, the tools that you care about. If there are features that are missing, just be relentless. Come find us. We're wearing white lanyards around here. Just give us your feature requests. We love that. If you want to be early testers of all of those features or more, sign up. We're here for that. Some people here are already early testers and provide us very valuable feedback. And then the second thing is, you might see Foundry initially as like a data platform, but it's actually really an operational platform that lets you build operational apps. And all of that is only possible by the creativity of you guys, the developers. And so just push the limits of the platform. And when you hit those and you think the platform doesn't scale enough for your limits, again, come talk to us. We'll be more than happy to help you push those limits. Cool. That's the end of my presentation.